There may be issues of like, resolution, or, we have more extensive contacts with our fingers domain and things like this. But I would argue that the alignment is hard to get right, because essentially, if you're saying that part of the palm domain is in a different conformation, and you subsequently align using the whole palm domain, that's not the proper thing to do, because there's a difference there. You always want to align on parts of the proteins that are the same. And so the proper way to do things would be to align on the catalytic carboxyl residues, which would be absolutely in the same spot for chemistry to occur, because that's what has to happen in both these cases. So I just want to show you real quick, I sort of did that, sort of low budget. So this is the white strands represents our DNA substrate in both cases. The red represents their substrate as modeled to ours if you do a secondary superposed matching on the whole palm, meaning you take both of our palms and stick them on top of each other, just the whole palm. And the second one is if you do a least squares alignment on catalytic aspartates, meaning you just take the C alpha residues of catalytic aspartates, just 3 points, and stick them on top of each other. Stick 2 structures on top of each other and see where the DNA substrates go. And what you can see is that the backbones are definitely off in both cases. But this is kind of what we expected because we have a larger thumb than they do, and our DNA is bent out of the active site where they observe a straight B form. So that's not surprising. But what's interesting to note is that within the actual active site is that you actually get a much better alignment of the DNA if you use the least squares superposition on catalytic aspartates than if you use the SSM on the whole palm. It's not as super evident here, but the numbers actually tell a very good story in the sense that if you look at the distance between the alpha phosphate positions of both our structures by an SSM superposed, that the gamma phosphate is off by about 1.1 angstroms, which is 164% of the distance relative to least squares if you do secondary superposed. And so basically what this is saying is that the positioning is much better if you do the least squares alignment than if you do the secondary structure matching in both cases. And so yes, there are still some differences in position here, but the punchline is that if you go all the way back to another dimension, if we go back here, the same residues are doing the same jobs. You still have the glycine serine motif positioned in the same spot. You still have the 3 catalytic carboxylates and the lysine 616, the lysine coordinating the 3' carbonyl phosphate. Everything is still in the same position as you expect for chemistry. And if there's a slight wiggle, it may be because of things like, again, they say more extensive interactions between fingers and the nucleotide and pulse C, and perhaps the thumb domain actually in ours because it's so much larger, it can potentially push the DNA a little bit. The chemistry is the same. There's nothing substantially different about the 2 structures so far. So then something curious happened in the paper that sort of described this paper. So I'll just read this. So the structure of G. clustophyllus pulse C and its comparison with eco and tacpole 3 structures also helps to resolve a conflicting issue raised by the early structure of tacpole 3. In the DNA-bound pulse C structure, Evans et al., the planes of the DNA bases are out of alignment with the beta strands of the polymerase active site by 30 degrees. In the tacpole 3 ternary structure, the planes of the DNA bases are positioned parallel to the active site of the beta strands, similar to the way DNA is bound to full beta. In the original model proposed for E. coli, however, a parallel alignment was not possible because it resulted in several clashes of the DNA with other regions of the polymerase, i.e. the thumb and PHP domains, see figure 1. As a result, the DNA was modeled such that the base planes and the active site beta strands were arranged at an angle of 30 degrees. Therefore, the pulse C ternary complex structure and E. coli pol 3 model revealed that the orientation of the base planes at an angle to the beta sheets is accommodated, whereas the tacpole 3 ternary complex structure demonstrates a parallel positioning of the base planes and beta strands. So basically, to summarize, what they're saying is that because of the differences observed between the pulse C and our structures, in terms of the wiggle of the DNA in the active site, that their original model of rotating the DNA all the way out of the way of the active, all the way out of the way of the thumb and the PHP domains, that's valid because the difference between these 2 models, pulse C and us, is observed. And so I've done a little sort of low budget analysis of this issue, and so I'd like to present that to you here, using their own figure in their own paper, but in this history. I do not know how these 3 enzymes were positioned, but they were positioned in such a way that you can compare the position of the DNA substrates in each one, according to them. So in theory, what you can do is, you can look at an angular difference between the DNA substrates as a function of the difference in the helical axes, angular difference between them, and the difference between the angles of a strand in the palm domain that you can see in each of the enzymes. So in principle, the way you would normally do this is you would line the proteins on a specific part of the protein, and then you look at the angular difference between the DNA substrates. I can't do that because this is this is like a PNG file, and these aren't structure files. But what I can do is sort of a low budget analysis using rulers and protractors to look at what the angular differences actually are between all the enzymes. So if you look at the difference between the helical axes of the pole C and the pole 3 complex that we solved, again, our DNA substrate bends out of the active site, so I'm just using the DNA helix inside the active site as a measure of where the helical axis is. You see a difference of 11 degrees. Okay, fair enough. If you look at how these protein structures are oriented relative to each other, you can see there's a 14-degree difference in the angle between the two strands. And so what you see is that if you compare the TAC pole 3 structure and the pole C structure, you get an angular difference of about 24.87 degrees by this kind of low-budget method I'm using. Fine. That about agrees with what they say. They're about saying there's a 30-degree difference. So far. But if you look at the pole 3 structure from E. coli and our TAC structure of pole 3, you actually see that the helical axis difference is 24.17 degrees. So they're saying, okay, we have a difference of 24.17 degrees, and there's a difference of 24.87 degrees between these two enzymes. So that, that says that our model is okay. But what you don't see is that the strands are actually off by 45 degrees in the two pictures, meaning that the true rotation of the two DNA substrates is more like 70 degrees. If you would actually overlay the two structures and compare the angle of the DNA that the DNA is making in the active sites. And so what they're arguing is that this 30-degree difference observed between pole 3 and pole C from TAC and Geobacillus postophilus is enough to account for a 70-degree difference between sort of TAC pole 3 and eco pole 3 based on their model here. Again, sort of a low-budget analysis. They don't have access to the structures, but using their figure and some geometry, you can kind of look into sort of what we're talking about here. And so, I guess my point is I don't think that that's true. I don't think that the wiggle room here sort of allows for this model. And a very easy thing to say is just that by rotating the DNA all the way out like that, you're destroying interactions that you need in the active site in order for chemistry to happen. And so that's just not plausible anyway. But this also sort of, again, this low-budget analysis kind of defeats the model for saying, well, the angular difference here counts for the angular difference here, which they don't think it does. Anyway, so one final thing I want to talk about is now that we have structures of 3 different C family polymerases, sort of what do their PHP domains look like? Because our PHP domain is still alive. It's still chewing DNA unless we sort of trick it with this kinetic trap with sort of the dideoxy-terminated primer and stuff. And so if you look at the white in both cases is our enzyme. The blue is the E. coli enzyme, and the red is pole C from Geobacillus postophilus. If you look at E. coli, it kind of makes sense why sort of the E. coli enzyme would be less active than ours, because you have these sort of arginines sort of sticking out here, which are not going to coordinate zinc metals. Instead of the histidines that would only be able to do so. And so that kind of makes sense, right? You have these big sort of blocks in the active site to not really coordinate these metals as well, and that might be affecting your activity. That may be why they don't, activity is not really observed from the E. coli DNA polymerase of the enzyme. I think that makes sense. Although, I will say that not everyone is convinced as I am that that's the case, and that this enzyme may still have activity, so more to be determined later. But in pole C, what I found particularly interesting is that actually the active site is exactly the same as ours, but they observe no activity whatsoever. The only difference between our active site and theirs is that their enzyme naturally has aspartate 212 to asparagine mutation, which is one of the mutations that I made out of 2 to try and kill the active site. But clearly, I know that when I make 2 mutations that should really mess up the active site, that still doesn't kill the activity of the enzyme. So something else has to be going on here that's responsible for activity, since they see clearly that they have the exact same active site but no activity, so what's going on? So I had a rough guess about what may be happening. So in our 2 structures, or in our structure of the ternary complex of DNA polymerase 3, we actually had 2 copies in the asymmetric unit. And what we noticed is that in one of the copies, outside of the active site, the DNA was actually bent, sort of away from the beta binding domain where there are DNA binding loops. And we thought this was because of crystal packing. We said, okay, because this DNA substrate does actually run into a symmetry made in the crystal, and so we figured that's just how it passed. But sort of thinking about it more now that I've had a chance to compare sort of PHP active sites, there's actually a little loop here that we can't see in any of our models so far because it's usually disordered, so we can't build it. But this loop in pole C is where there's an entire separate polypeptide chain that contains an exonuclease. Obviously, when they solved their structure, they chopped this out, which is why they don't see any exonuclease activity. They remove this from their enzyme. In pol 3, it's just a loop like this. But what's curious is there's multiple basic residues that stick out from this loop in our enzyme. And the DNA, if you look closely, this is in what we call copy B, and this is the DNA from copy A. And you can see that it's actually bent in towards these residues. And so it's possible, it's potentially possible, that this loop with all these sort of positively charged residues is actually escorting the DNA into the PHP active site, and that without it, you don't get activity. Especially because in pol C, they don't have this loop, they have a whole separate polypeptide chain that chews up DNA. It's interesting that that polypeptide chain that chews up DNA is in the same position. So one thing we're trying to pursue is sort of chopping out this loop in our enzyme and seeing if that makes a difference in activity, which, maybe you can have. So anyway, sort of future directions. I would like to get a structure of DNA polymerase 3 alpha and tau to look at how tau plays a role in the ligand sharing process of swing. Currently, my work with pol 3 tau and helicase is going well. We have crystals of the complex, and we're working towards a structural solution. I'm not going to say anything more than that, except that we're only getting sort of low resolution diffraction, and it's sad. It's just very sad, but we're trying not to be sad. And so we're going to try and sort of get that to a higher resolution and be happy. And then I'd also like to get complexes of helicase and DNA, since we don't know what our helicase member DNA looks like. And so that would be, by doing all of these three structures, in principle, you could reassemble a structure of the entire replication fork, which I don't think would be solvable. I shouldn't say never, but I think it will be very difficult to solve in one block because there's so many pieces that are very flexible. And so breaking into smaller, less flexible pieces is probably the way to go. Particularly considering you can use the tau subunit as a point of alignment to get everything together and then make a model. So with that, I'd like to move to my acknowledgements. Okay. I've grouped these into scientific, sort of personal, not that people. Okay. Anyway, so I'd like to thank Tom very, very much. Thank you a lot. You supported me for many years. You provided a wonderful, great place where the mentorship is excellent. You really know how to run a lab well. It is unbelievable. It's fantastic. There's so much support in the lab. There are so many people that are helpful. And whenever I've ever had a problem, I've always had someone to go to. I've never felt left behind. It is fantastic. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you. I then have to thank Scott Bailey, who was one of these network individuals who helped me out so much during my career. I used to make him kind of annoyed because I kind of don't have common sense as a rule. And so essentially, we would do things like load super loops with 60 ml syringes, and I would try and put them into little 10 beakers. And Scott would say, "What are you doing?" It's like, using forcing in PhD, right? So I couldn't do that, so that made me kind of raise my eyebrows at what's going on. I pour protein on the sink by accident sometimes. I didn't realize syringes operate under a vacuum. That's right. So I pulled out the plunger and pulled the protein in and it went out. And so that was so we had a couple raised eyebrows there. But Scott had a lot of patience. He was full of patience. And so he was actually able to help me get less done and sort of get these structures done. And again, I kind of took a jab at him earlier, but he's a fabulous mentor. And absolutely, I would have been completely lost without him. He was fantastic. So Scott, great. Okay. I have to thank my research committee, Nigel and Bill. Thank you both so very, very much for providing advice throughout the years and sort of watching out to make sure I don't drive off a cliff or something and do experiments and do terrible things. I really appreciate you guys. Have been wonderful. Thank you so much. Charles McHenry, my outside reader. I was really glad to get him as an outside reader because he has done so much outstanding stellar biochemistry in the field. Thank you. And he's just really absolutely fantastic. And he was very enthusiastic about my thesis. He said wonderful things that mean a lot to me. I'm very, very happy to have had him, and he's just great. Thank you so much. Bill Eliason couldn't be here today. Well, he's okay. It's just not here. Bill is my sort of partner in crime working on the helicase. He's a member of Scott's Army with me. And basically, he's just fantastic with machinery and light scattering and so many techniques and setting up trays, and he helps so much. And basically, without him there, there's no way I could basically carry on at certain points during my research. He's just fantastic. And